The Queen's Challenge.
The vast Andromeda galaxy was home to countless civilizations, each vying for power, influence, or survival. Among them, the Zenian Empire reigned supreme, their might unrivaled and their lineage unbroken for millennia.
At its helm stood Queen Zephyra, known as Zeph to her people, a being of crystal and magnificence. Her shimmering, translucent skin reflected the lights of her molten homeworld, Arthra, a planet bathed in fiery red and golden hues. Her eyes, burning like twin suns, were said to pierce through the strongest of wills. The Zenians prided themselves on their genetic purity and intellectual supremacy, traits that had carried their empire to the pinnacle of power. For centuries, the royal family had perpetuated their bloodline through a sacred ritual known as the Progenitor Ceremony. This ceremony was more than a cultural tradition, it was an ancient rite that ensured the future ruler would inherit the perfect genetic traits necessary to sustain the empire's dominance.
The Progenitor Ceremony was not for the faint of heart.
It was a trial as much as it was a ritual, requiring suitors from across the galaxy to prove their worth.
Only those whose genetic makeup harmonized flawlessly with the Queen's could succeed.
For centuries, advanced civilizations sent their champions, genetic prodigies, bioengineered elites, and representatives of interstellar diplomacy. Yet, every one of them had failed, rejected by the Queen's body and the ritual's inscrutable forces. Today, however, was different.
Among the suitors stood Ethan Cade, an unassuming human from the fledgling planet Earth. Ethan was an astronaut, diplomat, and geneticist rolled into one. Selected not for his technological advancements but for his species' unparalleled adaptability, he represented a world that many in the Andromeda galaxy dismissed as primitive. Humans were seen as latecomers to the galactic stage, a species too young and unrefined to matter. But Ethan had something Earth excelled at: resilience. The arrival of an underdog. When Ethan stepped into the ceremonial chamber, he couldn't help but marvel at its grandeur. The walls pulsed with bioorganic patterns, glowing faintly as if alive. The floor was a smooth, metallic surface that reflected the fiery hues of Arthra's atmosphere. Energy conduits snaked across the chamber, creating an intricate web of light and movement. At the far end, Queen Zeph sat on her throne, a towering figure whose presence dominated the room. She gazed down at Ethan, her burning eyes filled with skepticism. To her, the human looked fragile, a stark contrast to the advanced beings who had come before him. But there was something in his stance, in the way he held himself, that piqued her curiosity. "You," she said, her voice melodic yet commanding. "A human dares to stand before the Zenian throne? Do you understand the gravity of your presence here?" Ethan stepped forward, his posture firm and confident despite the oppressive atmosphere. "I do, Your Majesty. Humanity seeks an alliance with the Zenian Empire, and I am honored to participate in this ritual." A ripple of laughter echoed through the chamber, its source the Queen herself. "Your species has barely left its cradle, crawling out of the primordial ooze. What makes you believe you can succeed where countless others have failed?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because humanity thrives on doing the impossible." The ritual begins. With a wave of her hand, Queen Zeph signaled the start of the ceremony. The chamber dimmed, and the walls came alive with streams of energy that coalesced into glowing orbs. These orbs floated between Ethan and Zeph, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the galaxy. The Progenitor Ceremony was not merely symbolic, it was a rigorous fusion of alien science and ancient mysticism. Streams of energy connected the Queen and her suitor, analyzing their genetic compatibility at a molecular level. The process was designed to reject all but the most perfect match. Ethan felt the energy wash over him, a tingling sensation that quickly intensified into something more profound. He could sense it probing his DNA, dissecting every strand, every sequence. For most participants, this was where the ritual ended, their genetic makeup rejected outright by the Zenian physiology. But for Ethan, something unexpected happened. The energy streams, instead of faltering, grew brighter. They harmonized, their rhythms aligning in perfect sync. The chamber filled with a blinding light, and for a moment, it felt as though the universe itself had paused to witness this event. When the light subsided, Queen Zeph stared at Ethan, her expression one of disbelief. Her crystalline skin glowed with an angry red hue, a reflection of her inner turmoil.
Impossible, she hissed, her voice sharp and venomous. No being has ever succeeded on the first attempt. Ethan shrugged, his characteristic humor breaking through the tension.
Guess I'm just lucky. The aftermath of success. Word of Ethan's success spread like wildfire through the Zenian Empire.
For a species that valued genetic purity above all else, the idea that a human, a so-called primitive, had succeeded where others had failed was both shocking and infuriating.
Ethan found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as both a hero and an anomaly.
Zenians gathered in the streets to discuss the implications, their debates ranging from admiration to outright disdain.
For Queen Zeph, the ritual's outcome was a personal affront.
Her pride as the pinnacle of Zenian evolution had been challenged, her supremacy questioned by a being she had deemed inferior. She confined herself to her chambers, her thoughts a storm of anger and confusion.
How could this have happened?
How could a human, of all species, succeed where the most advanced beings in the galaxy had failed? Ethan, meanwhile, was grappling with the weight of his newfound role. He hadn't come to Arthra expecting to participate in an alien fertility ritual, let alone succeed. But now, the alliance between Earth and the Zenian Empire hinged on the bond he had formed with the Queen.
A tense summons. Days after the ceremony, Ethan was summoned to Queen Zeph's private chambers.
The air was thick with tension as he entered, the room bathed in an ominous red glow.
Zeph stood at the center, her towering figure radiating authority and anger.
You, she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade.
You have humiliated me before my people. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?
Ethan met her gaze, unflinching.
I didn't mean to offend you or your traditions.
I only sought to prove humanity's worth.
Worth? Zeph scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain.
Your species' mediocrity has no place in the annals of Zenian greatness.
Greatness isn't born from purity, Ethan replied calmly. It's born from the ability to adapt and grow. Isn't that the essence of evolution? For a moment, silence hung between them.
Zeph's fiery eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Deep down, she couldn't ignore the truth in Ethan's words. The human had succeeded where countless others had failed, not through trickery or deceit, but through sheer resilience and adaptability.
The alien queen's dilemma.
Queen Zeph stood motionless in the dim glow of her private chamber, her crystalline skin shimmering with shifting hues of anger, confusion, and curiosity. For centuries, her people had upheld their ideals of purity and perfection, their superiority uncontested across the Andromeda galaxy. Yet, in one moment, a human, a being from a species she barely considered worthy of attention, had shattered those beliefs. Ethan Cade, the human who had succeeded where countless others had failed, was not like the ambassadors or suitors she had encountered before. He was unremarkable at first glance, physically smaller, lacking the towering presence of the Zenian elites, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of determination and a quiet defiance that intrigued her despite herself.
Zeph's thoughts were a whirlwind.
She had expected him to fail, as all the others had, but the ritual had spoken. The bond it had forged between them was undeniable. To reject it would mean rejecting the very traditions that her empire was built upon. And yet, accepting it meant acknowledging humanity's potential to challenge the supremacy of her people. As the queen pondered her next move, her personal advisor, Varen, entered the chamber. Like Zeph, his crystalline skin reflected his emotions, his shimmering green hue a signal of unease. Your Majesty, Varen began, bowing deeply, the council grows restless. Word of the human's success has spread far beyond Arthra. There are those who see this as a sign of weakness. Zeph's fiery eyes narrowed. Weakness, she repeated, her voice low and sharp.
Do they not see that this was no accident?
The ritual itself chose him.
Varen hesitated before replying, the ritual's outcome is unprecedented.
It has never failed us before, but the council questions whether the human's success was truly destined or merely a flaw in the ancient systems. Zeph clenched her fists, her skin pulsing with a deep crimson glow.
The council forgets that I am their queen. My authority is absolute, and the ritual is sacred. To question its results is to question the very foundation of our empire. Varen nodded, his unease apparent. Even so, there are whispers among the traditionalists. They believe the human's presence threatens our way of life. Some have even begun to rally against your decision to allow him to remain. Zeph turned away, staring out the window at the molten landscape of Arthra. The weight of leadership had never felt so heavy. Let them whisper, she said finally, her voice quieter but no less resolute. Ethan Cade is under my protection. If they wish to challenge me, they will face the full wrath of their queen. A conversation between worlds. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself adjusting to life on Arthra. The Zenian capital city, an architectural marvel of towering crystalline spires and bioluminescent pathways, was unlike anything he had ever seen. Yet, despite its beauty, he felt the weight of being an outsider. Everywhere he went, Zenian eyes followed him, their expressions a mix of curiosity, disdain, and awe. One evening, as he explored the palace's vast gardens, a rare oasis of life on an otherwise molten planet, he was startled by the sudden appearance of Queen Zeph. She moved with the grace of a predator, her shimmering form almost blending into the garden's glowing flora. "Enjoying our gardens, human?" she asked, her tone unreadable. Ethan turned, offering a faint smile. "Trying to. It's hard to relax when half your empire seems to think I don't belong here." Zeph stepped closer, her imposing presence making the space feel smaller. "And do you think you belong here?" Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "I don't know. But I do know that I've been given a chance, by your people, by the ritual, to prove that humans are more than what you think we are. That's enough for me." Zeph studied him in silence for a moment before speaking. "You are an enigma, Ethan Cade. You're kind, you adapt, you endure. It's both admirable and infuriating." Ethan chuckled softly. "We're a stubborn bunch, I'll admit. But that's how we've survived. And maybe that's what your empire needs right now. Someone willing to challenge the status quo." Zeph's expression softened, though only slightly. "Careful, human. You tread a dangerous path." Ethan shrugged, his smile widening. "Danger seems to follow me wherever I go." Shadows of rebellion. As the days turned into weeks, tensions within the Zenian Empire continued to rise. The traditionalists, emboldened by their disdain for Ethan, began to mobilize. Secret meetings were held in the dark corners of the capital, and whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. Among the most vocal dissenters was General Krylos, a revered military leader and staunch traditionalist. Krylos viewed Ethan not only as a threat to the Zenian way of life but also as an insult to their heritage. In his eyes, allowing a human to succeed in the Progenitor Ceremony was a betrayal of everything the Empire stood for. Krylos' followers, a mix of elite warriors and influential council members, began to plot against both Ethan and Queen Zeph. Their goal was simple: remove the human by any means necessary and restore the purity of the Zenian throne. The first attack. One fateful evening, as Ethan dined alone in one of the palace's grand halls, the attack came. A group of masked assailants, their crystalline armor reflecting the flickering light of the chamber, burst through the doors. Their weapons, pulsing with energy, were aimed squarely at Ethan. Reacting on instinct, Ethan overturned the table and used it as cover. Years of training as an astronaut and survivalist kicked in, and he quickly assessed his options. The palace guards were nowhere in sight, likely distracted by a diversion elsewhere. The assailants moved swiftly, their strikes precise and coordinated. But Ethan was no easy target. Using his surroundings to his advantage, he evaded their attacks, disarming one of them and turning their weapon against them. Despite his efforts, it was clear he was outmatched. Just as the situation seemed dire, a blinding light filled the room. Queen Zeph stormed in, her crystalline skin glowing with an intense, fiery red hue. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a wave of energy that sent the assailants sprawling. Her voice, thunderous and commanding, echoed through the chamber. "Enough," she roared. "Anyone who dares harm him will face my wrath." The attackers, realizing their defeat, retreated into the shadows. Zeph turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of anger and concern. "Are you injured?" Ethan shook his head, though his breathing was heavy. "Nothing I can't handle. But it seems not everyone's thrilled about our arrangement." Zeph's eyes narrowed.
This was no mere act of defiance.
It was an attempt to undermine my authority. They will pay for this. Whispers of betrayal. The attack on Ethan had sent shockwaves through the palace and the Zenian capital. Queen Zeph's wrath was palpable, and her declaration of retribution left no room for ambiguity. The attempt on Ethan's life was not just an assault on him but a direct challenge to her authority as queen.
The walls of the empire trembled under the weight of the growing unrest.
The following day, Zeph convened her council in the Great Hall of the Zenith Throne.
The room, a marvel of bioorganic architecture, glowed with pulsating energy that mirrored the queen's mood. Towering crystalline spires lined the chamber, their sharp edges refracting light into dazzling rainbows.
The council members, each a figure of immense influence, stood in their designated alcoves, their expressions ranging from defiance to unease. Ethan stood beside Zeph, an unusual position for an outsider. His presence alone was a statement. The queen would not hide him, nor would she abandon him to the wolves of political intrigue. His gaze remained steady, though he could feel the weight of 100 eyes boring into him. Zeph raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. An attack was made within the sanctity of this palace, she began, her voice carrying the authority of 1,000 years of rulership. This act of treachery was not merely against the human ambassador but against the throne itself. Such betrayal will not be tolerated. A murmur rippled through the council, but one voice rose above the rest. General Krylos, his crystalline armor gleaming with hues of defiance, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone respectful yet firm, "the Progenitor Ceremony has never yielded such an unexpected result. Many among our people view this bond as a threat to the purity of our empire. Should we not question whether this human's presence is a danger to our traditions?" Zeph's fiery eyes locked onto Krylos, and her crystalline skin shimmered with a faint red hue. "You speak of tradition, General, yet you undermine the sacred ritual that has guided our people for millennia. Are you suggesting the ritual is flawed?" Krylos hesitated but did not back down. "I suggest, Your Majesty, that the ritual's outcome may be unprecedented. And unprecedented events often lead to instability." Zeph's voice turned icy. "Instability does not come from the ritual, General. It comes from those who cannot accept change." Ethan, sensing the tension rise, stepped forward. "If I may, Your Majesty." Zeph glanced at him but gave a subtle nod. Ethan turned to the council. "I didn't come here to disrupt your traditions or challenge your authority. Humanity seeks only to forge an alliance, one built on mutual respect and understanding. The Progenitor Ceremony was your tradition, not mine, and yet it chose me. If that choice is difficult to accept, perhaps it's because the universe is telling us something. It's time to evolve." The chamber fell silent, Ethan's words hanging heavily in the air. Some council members exchanged uncertain glances, while others, like Krylos, remained stone-faced. A brewing rebellion. Despite Ethan's speech, the tension in the empire only grew. Whispers of rebellion spread beyond the palace walls, reaching the common people. Traditionalist factions, emboldened by Krylos and other dissenters, began organizing in secret. Their message was simple: the human's presence was a corruption of Zenian purity, and Queen Zeph's acceptance of him was a betrayal of their heritage. Krylos himself became the figurehead of this growing movement. In clandestine meetings, he rallied his followers, painting Ethan as a usurper and Zeph as a queen who had lost her way. The Progenitor Ceremony was sacred, he declared to a room of conspirators. But even sacred traditions can be corrupted. If we do not act now, the empire will fall into chaos. Among the rebels were elite warriors, scientists, and even minor council members, all united by their fear of change. Their goal was clear: remove Ethan, force Zeph to renounce the bond, and restore the empire's so-called purity. To achieve this, they would stop at nothing. A fragile bond. As the rebellion brewed in the shadows, the bond between Ethan and Zeph deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had started as a forced alliance became something more, a relationship built on mutual respect and growing trust. Zeph, despite her initial disdain for Ethan, found herself drawn to his resilience and unyielding optimism. He challenged her in ways no one else dared,
questioning her perspectives and pushing her to see the world beyond the rigid framework of Zenian tradition. For a queen who had spent centuries surrounded by sycophants and advisors too afraid to speak their minds, Ethan was a breath of fresh air.
Ethan, in turn, discovered layers to Zeph that few had ever seen.
Beneath her imposing exterior was a being burdened by the weight of leadership and centuries of solitude. Her confidence masked a deep-seated fear of failure, a fear that she might not live up to the legacy of her ancestors. Their late-night conversations became a ritual of their own. They spoke of their respective worlds, their hopes and fears, and the future they hoped to build. Slowly, the walls between them crumbled, replaced by a connection neither had expected. A test of loyalty. One fateful evening, Zeph and Ethan were discussing plans to address the growing unrest when Varen entered the room, his normally calm demeanor replaced by urgency. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply. "We have intelligence that Krylos and his faction are planning an assault on the palace." Zeph's crystalline skin flared red, a sign of her rising anger. "They dare to bring open conflict to the throne?" Varen nodded grimly. "It seems their patience has run out. They aim to seize the palace and eliminate the human ambassador as a symbol of their defiance." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we need to act fast. If they're coming, we need to be ready." Zeph turned to him, her gaze steady. "This is not your fight, Ethan. You've already risked your life once. I will not ask you to do so again." Ethan met her gaze, his voice resolute. "It may not be my fight, but it's my choice. I'm not going to stand by while people try to tear down what we've started." For a moment, Zeph said nothing, her fiery eyes searching his. Finally, she nodded. "Then we fight together." The storm breaks. As the rebels approached the palace, Zeph and her loyal forces prepared for the battle ahead. The palace's defenses were formidable, but Krylos' forces were relentless, their numbers bolstered by those who had lost faith in the queen. The clash was brutal and chaotic. Energy weapons lit up the night sky, their beams slicing through the air as the rebels attempted to breach the palace's gates. Inside, Ethan and Zeph fought side by side, their bond now forged in the crucible of battle. Ethan's human ingenuity proved invaluable. Using his knowledge of engineering, he rigged makeshift defenses and traps that slowed the rebels' advance. Zeph, with her immense power and commanding presence, rallied her forces, her voice cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Despite their efforts, the battle took its toll. The palace walls trembled under the relentless assault, and it became clear that the fight was far from over. The battle for the throne. The sounds of battle reverberated through the crystalline halls of the palace, a symphony of chaos as energy weapons clashed, explosions echoed, and shouts filled the air. Outside, the once pristine cityscape of the Zenian capital was awash with the glow of rebellion. The rebels, led by General Krylos, were relentless in their advance, their forces bolstered by defectors from within the Empire's ranks. Inside the palace, Queen Zeph stood tall, her crystalline skin glowing with an intense crimson hue, a visual manifestation of her determination and anger. By her side was Ethan Cade, the human whose presence had sparked both hope and conflict. Together, they prepared to defend not only their lives but the very future of the Zenian Empire. The Queen's command. Zeph turned to her trusted advisor, Varen, who stood at attention despite the tension in the air. "Seal the inner sanctum," she commanded, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Evacuate the non-combatants to the lower levels and secure all critical systems. We cannot allow the rebels to breach the heart of the palace." Varen bowed deeply. "As you command, Your Majesty." Zeph then faced Ethan, her fiery gaze meeting his steady eyes. "This palace was built to withstand armies, but Krylos has gathered enough support to test its limits. You've already done more than anyone could ask, Ethan. You don't have to stay." Ethan crossed his arms, his expression resolute. "You can forget that idea. I'm not going anywhere. This fight is as much mine as it is yours." For a moment, a flicker of gratitude crossed Zeph's face. "Very well. But stay close. I will not lose you to this madness." Krylos' Gambit. On the outskirts of the palace, Krylos stood amidst his army. His crystalline armor glinted in the light of the burning city, and his expression was one of grim determination. Around him, the rebels buzzed with anticipation, their energy weapons primed and their resolve unshaken. Krylos addressed his forces, his voice amplified by a pulsating device on his chest. Today, we reclaim the Empire from those who have betrayed its purity. Today, we restore the traditions that have guided us for millennia. The Queen has lost her way, and this human, this alien contaminant, has no place among us. The throne will be ours once more. A roar of approval erupted from the crowd as Krylos raised his fist, signaling the final assault. The rebels surged forward, their ranks a tide of anger and rebellion. A fight on two fronts. The first wave of rebels struck the palace's outer defenses, their energy blasts illuminating the night. Automated turrets sprang to life, their precision strikes cutting through the advancing forces. The rebels countered with heavy artillery, their concentrated firepower gradually wearing down the defenses. Inside the palace, Zeph and Ethan worked tirelessly to coordinate their response. Zeph's knowledge of the palace's intricate systems allowed her to deploy defensive measures with precision, while Ethan's ingenuity and adaptability proved invaluable in outsmarting the rebels. At one point, Ethan found himself in a control room, frantically rewiring a power conduit. "If I can reroute this energy to the eastern turrets, we might be able to buy ourselves more time," he muttered. Zeph, standing nearby, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. "Your resourcefulness is unexpected," she admitted. Ethan grinned, despite the tension. "Adapt or die, that's the human way." Zeph's expression softened, though her resolve remained firm. "Then let's ensure we survive." The turning point. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the rebels were not merely seeking to overthrow the Queen, they were intent on destroying everything she had built. Explosions rocked the palace as Krylos' forces breached the outer gates, their advance marked by destruction and chaos. Zeph and Ethan led a group of loyal guards to intercept the rebels in the Grand Atrium, a sprawling space filled with towering crystalline pillars that reflected the fiery light of the battle outside. The clash was brutal and unrelenting, energy blasts and melee strikes echoing through the chamber. At the height of the battle, Krylos himself appeared, his towering form cutting through the chaos. His crystalline armor glowed with an ominous red hue, and his weapon, a massive energy halberd, radiated power. "Zeph," he roared, his voice a thunderous challenge. "Face me and prove you are still worthy of the throne." Zeph stepped forward, her crystalline skin glowing brighter with each step. "You dare to challenge your queen," she replied, her voice filled with both fury and authority. "You are no leader, Krylos. You are a coward who hides behind tradition to mask your fear of change." The two clashed in a violent display of power, their strikes sending shockwaves through the atrium. Krylos' brute strength was matched by Zeph's precision and agility, their battle a deadly dance of fire and light. A human's intervention. As Zeph and Krylos fought, Ethan found himself facing a group of rebels who had broken through the defenses. Armed with only a modified energy rifle and his wits, he used the environment to his advantage, leading his attackers into a series of traps he had hastily constructed earlier. One by one, the rebels fell, but Ethan's stamina was waning. Just as another wave approached, he noticed something unusual in the palace's systems, a hidden subroutine within the defense grid that had been deactivated long ago. If reactivated, it could turn the tide of the battle. Racing back to the control room, Ethan worked frantically to bypass the safeguards and bring the subroutine online. As the system powered up, a deep hum resonated through the palace, followed by the activation of dormant turrets and energy barriers. The rebels, caught off guard, found themselves surrounded by automated defenses that decimated their ranks. The tide of battle shifted dramatically in favor of the Queen's forces. The Queen's victory. In the atrium, the battle between Zeph and Krylos reached its climax. With a final, devastating strike, Zeph disarmed Krylos, her blade pointed at his chest. "Yield," she commanded, her voice a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You have betrayed your people, but I will not stoop to your level. Surrender, and you may yet live." Krylos, his pride shattered, lowered his gaze. "The Empire was never meant for this," he muttered before collapsing to his knees. Zeph's guards moved in to restrain him, and the battle was over. A new dawn. As the sun rose over Arthra, the fires of rebellion were extinguished. The palace, though scarred by the battle, still stood as a symbol of resilience. Zeph addressed her people, her voice carrying the weight of the night's events.
"Change is never easy," she said, her crystalline skin glowing with renewed determination. "But it is necessary. We have faced the darkness of rebellion, and we have emerged stronger. Let this be the beginning of a new era, one of unity, growth, and strength." Ethan stood by her side, his presence a testament to the bond they had forged. Together, they had defended not only the throne but the future of the Zenian Empire, the aftermath of rebellion. The palace stood quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed it hours earlier. The fires of rebellion had been extinguished, but the scars of the battle remained, etched into the once pristine walls and shattered crystal spires of the Zenian capital. Soldiers moved through the halls, carrying the wounded and securing the remnants of Krylos' forces. The air was thick with the weight of what had transpired, a mix of relief, uncertainty, and the heavy burden of rebuilding. Queen Zeph stood on the balcony overlooking the city, her crystalline skin glinting faintly in the soft morning light. From her vantage point, she could see the traces of destruction, the smoke still rising from distant sectors, the streets filled with weary citizens trying to make sense of the events. Yet amidst the ruins, there was also hope. The rebellion had been quelled, and the empire, though shaken, still stood. Behind her, Ethan Cade approached, his movements quiet yet deliberate. He, too, bore the marks of the battle, scorch marks on his jacket, a gash along his arm hastily bandaged, and a weariness in his eyes that spoke of the weight he carried. Despite it all, his presence was steady, his resilience unyielding. "You should rest," Zeph said without turning, her voice softer than usual. "You've done more than enough." Ethan leaned on the railing beside her, his gaze sweeping over the city. "Rest can wait. I'm more worried about what comes next." Zeph's fiery eyes shifted to him, a faint flicker of gratitude breaking through her stoic expression. "What comes next is rebuilding. And ensuring this never happens again. The fate of Krylos." General Krylos, the architect of the rebellion, was brought before the Zenian High Council later that day. His once pristine crystalline armor was cracked and dulled, a reflection of the defeat that now weighed heavily on his shoulders. The council chamber, though still bearing the marks of recent unrest, remained a symbol of the empire's enduring strength. Zeph presided over the proceedings, her commanding presence filling the room. The council members, a mix of allies and those who had wavered during the rebellion, watched in silence as the trial began. "Krylos," Zeph began, her voice cold and unyielding, "you stand accused of treason against the throne, inciting rebellion, and endangering the lives of countless citizens. Do you deny these charges?" The former general raised his head, his gaze meeting hers with a mix of defiance and resignation. "I do not deny my actions, Your Majesty. I believed I was acting in the best interest of the Empire." Zeph's crystalline skin flared briefly with a crimson hue, a sign of her restrained anger. "You endangered everything we have built, all for the sake of clinging to outdated ideals. Your actions nearly destroyed us." Krylos remained silent, his defiance tempered by the reality of his defeat. Zeph continued, her tone softening slightly. "But you are not the only one to blame. The rebellion was born from fear, fear of change, fear of the unknown. That fear is something I must address, not with anger, but with understanding." The council murmured in surprise at her words, but Zeph silenced them with a raised hand. "Krylos, your life is forfeit under our laws. But as queen, I have the power to grant mercy. I sentence you to exile, to wander the stars far from the empire you sought to destroy. Perhaps, in solitude, you will find the wisdom you lacked here." Krylos bowed his head, a flicker of something, perhaps gratitude, crossing his face. "As you command, Your Majesty." Rebuilding bridges. The aftermath of the rebellion was not just a time for rebuilding the physical structures of the empire but also its fractured trust. Zeph knew that her position as queen had been shaken, her decisions questioned by even her closest allies. The bond with Ethan, though now a symbol of change, remained a contentious point for many. To address this, Zeph and Ethan embarked on a tour of the empire, visiting the outer colonies and the heart of the Zenian capital. It was a journey meant to show unity, to remind the people of what they stood for and what they could achieve together. Their first stop was Erythra Prime, a colony on the edge of Zenian space.
Known for its harsh conditions and fiercely independent populace, Erythra had been a hotbed of rebellion. Zeph and Ethan arrived to a mixed reception, curiosity, hostility, and cautious hope all mingling in the eyes of the gathered crowd. Zeph addressed them with her characteristic authority, but there was a new warmth to her words. "The events of the past weeks have tested us all," she began. "Our strength, our resolve, and our unity. I will not pretend that change is easy, nor will I deny the fear that it brings. But fear must not guide us. Instead, we must look to the future with open minds and open hearts." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady and sincere. "I'm not here to replace your traditions or force my world's ways upon yours. I'm here because I believe in what you've built and what you can become. Humanity's greatest strength has always been our ability to adapt, and I think that's a lesson we can share." The crowd's reaction was subdued at first, but as Zeph and Ethan continued their tour, the seeds of acceptance began to take root. The Queen's willingness to confront the rebellion's causes head-on, combined with Ethan's unrelenting determination, started to sway even the most skeptical hearts. The symbol of unity. As the Empire began to heal, an announcement from Zeph sent ripples across the galaxy. A grand ceremony would be held on Arthra to celebrate the newfound unity of the Zenian people and their alliance with humanity. Representatives from Earth were invited, as well as leaders from other interstellar civilizations. The preparations were monumental. The palace, still bearing the scars of battle, was transformed into a symbol of resilience and renewal. The crystal spires were repaired, their surfaces reflecting the fiery skies of Arthra, and the grand atrium was adorned with banners bearing the sigils of both the Zenian Empire and Earth. On the day of the ceremony, thousands gathered in the capital, their voices a harmonious blend of anticipation and hope. Zeph stood before them, radiant and commanding, with Ethan at her side. "This is not the end of our journey," Zeph declared, her voice resonating through the air. "It is the beginning of a new era. One where unity, not fear, guides us. One where diversity strengthens us. Together, we will forge a future that honors our past while embracing the unknown." As the crowd erupted into applause, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had come to the Zenian Empire as an outsider, a representative of a distant and unassuming world. Now, he stood as a partner to a queen, a bridge between species, and a symbol of what could be achieved through courage and collaboration. The Unity Accord. The grand ceremony on Arthra had marked a turning point in the Zenian Empire's history. The unity Zeph and Ethan had fought so hard to establish was now in its infancy, fragile but full of potential. Yet, even as the crowds dispersed and the banners of celebration were taken down, the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had taken notice of the events on Arthra, and with it came opportunities and dangers. A fragile alliance. Zeph sat in her private chamber, surrounded by holographic displays projecting star charts, trade routes, and political reports from across the Empire. The rebellion had weakened the outer colonies, leaving them vulnerable to opportunistic factions that sought to exploit the Empire's temporary instability. Among these factions was the Joreth Collective, a militaristic alliance notorious for its aggressive expansion. Varen, Zeph's loyal advisor, entered the room, his crystalline skin shimmering with the soft green hues of concern. "Your Majesty," he began, bowing slightly, "we've received reports that the Joreth Collective has begun amassing forces near the Erythra Prime sector. Their movements suggest an intent to test our defenses." Zeph's fiery eyes narrowed, her expression unyielding. "The Joreth will not find us weak, Varen. Dispatch a fleet to Erythra Prime and reinforce the colonies. Make it clear that any incursion into our territory will be met with the full might of the Zenian Empire." Varen hesitated. "Your Majesty, with our resources stretched thin after the rebellion, we may not have the strength for a prolonged conflict." Before Zeph could respond, Ethan entered the chamber, his presence commanding attention. "Then maybe we don't need a conflict," he said, leaning against the doorway. "Let me talk to them." Zeph turned to him, her expression skeptical. "The Joreth are not known for diplomacy, Ethan. They respect power, not words." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But they also respect survival. And if there's one thing humanity has proven, it's that we know how to survive. Let me try. If I fail, you can send the fleet." For a moment, Zeph studied him, her fiery gaze searching his face for any sign of doubt.
Finding none, she nodded. Very well. But I will prepare the fleet regardless. If the Jorith refuse to listen, we will be ready. Confronting the Jorith. Ethan's journey to the Jorith Collective's border was tense, the atmosphere aboard the diplomatic vessel heavy with anticipation. The Jorith were known for their ruthlessness, their fleet comprised of jagged, obsidian-like ships designed to intimidate. As Ethan's vessel approached their territory, it was immediately intercepted by a trio of Jorith warships. A holographic projection flickered to life on the ship's command deck, revealing a towering Jorith commander clad in dark, spiked armor. His voice was a guttural growl, filled with disdain. Human! You dare approach the Jorith Collective? Ethan stepped forward, his posture calm but firm. I'm here on behalf of the Zenian Empire. Your movements near Erythra Prime have been noticed, and we want to avoid unnecessary conflict. The commander's laughter was a harsh, grating sound. Conflict? The Zenians are weakened, their queen clinging to fragile alliances with lesser species. Your presence only proves their desperation. Ethan's expression didn't waver. Maybe. Or maybe it proves something else, that the Zenians are willing to adapt and grow. You call humanity a lesser species, but we've faced extinction more times than I can count and come out stronger every time. If you think we're weak, you're underestimating us, and that's a mistake. The commander's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. You speak boldly for one so small. But words mean little in the face of power. Ethan nodded. Then let's talk about power. You could attack Erythra Prime, and maybe you'd win. But it wouldn't stop there. The Zenians would retaliate, and so would humanity. We may not have your numbers or your weapons, but we're stubborn, and we don't give up. You wouldn't just be fighting one empire, you'd be fighting an idea. And that's a war you can't win. For a long moment, the commander said nothing. Then, with a grudging nod, he spoke. Perhaps you are not as weak as you appear, human. Very well. We will withdraw for now. But know this, the Jorith do not forget. The transmission ended, and the tension aboard the ship lifted. Ethan exhaled deeply, his confidence giving way to relief. The immediate threat had been averted, but he knew the Jorith's warning was not an idle one. A new challenge. When Ethan returned to Arthra, he was greeted by Zeph in the grand atrium of the palace. Her crystalline skin glowed softly, her expression one of mixed relief and frustration. You took a great risk, she said, her tone sharp. If the Jorith had attacked your ship. They didn't, Ethan interrupted, his voice calm but firm. And now we have time to rebuild, to strengthen the Empire before they try again. Zeph's fiery eyes softened, though her frustration remained. You have a way of defying expectations, Ethan Cade. It's kind of my thing, he replied with a wry smile. But we can't keep reacting to threats like this. We need to show the galaxy that the Zenian Empire isn't just strong, it's united. Zeph considered his words, her gaze thoughtful. Unity is not something that can be achieved overnight. It requires trust, and trust is in short supply. Then we'll earn it, Ethan said. One step at a time. The Council of Worlds. In the months that followed, Zeph and Ethan worked tirelessly to solidify the Empire's unity and expand its influence. Together, they proposed the formation of a Council of Worlds, a coalition of allied civilizations dedicated to mutual defense, cooperation, and progress. The Council's first meeting was held on Arthra, drawing representatives from across the galaxy. The Jorith were notably absent, but many others attended, intrigued by the idea of a new galactic order. Zeph addressed the assembly with her characteristic authority, her voice resonating through the chamber. The galaxy is vast, and our challenges are many. But together, we can overcome them. The Zenian Empire stands ready to lead, not through dominance, but through collaboration. Let this council be a beacon of hope, a testament to what we can achieve when we stand united. Ethan followed her speech with his own, his words heartfelt and inspiring. Humanity is new to this stage, but we've learned that survival isn't about standing alone, it's about standing together. This council isn't just about alliances.
It's about building a future where every world, every species, has a voice. The assembly erupted in applause, and for the first time in months, Zeph allowed herself a moment of hope. The rebellion, the challenges, the sacrifices, they had all led to this moment. The future was uncertain, but it was a future worth fighting for.